Rain hammered the asphalt like it was angry at the night itself. Red and blue lights cut through the darkness, flashing across wet pavement, brick walls, and the trembling hands of a woman standing on the sidewalk. Her jacket hung half open, one sleeve torn, buttons scattered like small broken teeth near her feet. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stood there, chin lifted, eyes steady, absorbing the humiliation in silence while a police cruiser idled behind her, engine growling low, impatient. The officer's voice still echoed in the air, sharp and careless. "Don't touch me," she had said calmly. He didn't listen. "Before we go any further, take a second and tell me, where are you watching from right now? Somewhere quiet? Somewhere loud?" It's strange how one moment, one story, can travel across cities and oceans to reach you exactly when you need it. Leave your place in the comments. You're not alone here. Her name was Grace Thompson, and moments earlier, she had been walking home from a late dinner, heels clicking softly, mind replaying tomorrow's court schedule. She wore a cream-colored jacket, tailored and professional, the kind that made her feel grounded after long days of listening to other people's pain. She didn't notice the police car slowing behind her at first. Why would she? She had done nothing wrong. The siren chirped once. "Ma'am, stop right there." Grace turned, confused but compliant. Her hands were visible. Her voice was steady. "Is there a problem, officer?" Officer Ethan Miller stepped out of the car with the kind of posture that came from years of authority never being questioned. He scanned her up and down, not carefully, not professionally, but with an assumption already formed. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "Dinner. 2 blocks that way," Grace replied, gesturing calmly. He frowned. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for." Her brows knit together. Description of who? Instead of answering, Ethan stepped closer. Too close. His presence pressed into her space like a threat. Grace felt it then, that familiar, sinking recognition she had known since childhood. This wasn't about a suspect. This was about perception. "I need to search you," he said. "For what reason?" Grace asked, voice firm but polite. His jaw tightened.
"I'm afraid it is."
"Don't make this difficult." She shook her head slowly. "I don't consent to a search. I'd like to know why I was stopped." That was when everything shifted. Ethan reached out suddenly, grabbing her jacket as if it were proof of something illegal. Fabric tore with a sharp sound that sliced through the rain. Grace gasped, not from pain but from shock. The cold air hit her skin. So did the weight of every pair of unseen eyes that might have been watching. "Hey," she said, stepping back. "You can't." "Don't resist," he barked, though she wasn't resisting at all. Her heart slammed hard against her ribs, not in fear for her life, but in disbelief. The kind that stings deeper.
"You need to come
The kind
with me
that
now."
asks, how is this still
really
happening?
necessary?
If you
I'm
were
afraid
standing
it
there
is.
watching this unfold, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up, filmed, frozen in shock? Be honest with yourself and share it below. And if this moment already stirred something heavy in your chest, tap like,
You're under
just to
arrest
say you're here
for
and you
obstruction
feel it
of
too.
justice.
Grace
Please,
wrapped
you
her
don't
arms
understand. I
around
was only
herself
trying to help.
instinctively, dignity bruised but unbroken. "Officer," she said quietly, "I'm asking you to stop." Ethan scoffed. "You people always say that." The words landed like a slap. Grace inhaled slowly. Years of discipline held her steady. Years of courtrooms, of listening without reacting, of choosing restraint over rage. She reached into her purse
You
carefully
need to
and
come with
pulled
me
out her
now.
wallet. "My
this
name is
really
Grace
necessary?
Thompson,"
I'm
she
afraid
said,
it is.
opening it. "I'm a federal judge." The rain seemed to pause. Ethan laughed once, short, dismissive. "Yeah. And I'm the president." She met his eyes, unwavering. "Badge number
You're under
4172.
arrest for obstruction
You might want to
of
call this in."
Please, you don't
For the first
understand. I was
time,
only trying to
uncertainty
help.
flickered across his face. In the distance, thunder rolled, low, heavy, like something vast was waking up. And that was the moment when the night began to turn. Ethan's radio crackled softly at his shoulder, the sound suddenly too loud in the silence that followed Grace's words. Rain slid down the brim of his cap, dripping onto his cheek like sweat. He glanced at the wallet in her hand, then
You need
back
to
at
come
her
with me
face,
now.
really looked
Is
this
this really
time.
necessary?
The calm.
I'm afraid it
The
is.
control. Not the panic he expected. "Step back," he muttered, more to himself than to her. Grace didn't move forward. She didn't raise her voice. She simply held the wallet open, letting the embossed seal catch the glow of the cruiser lights. United States Federal Judiciary. Her photo. Her name. Unavoidable. You assaulted me, she said quietly. And you're still doing it. Something in Ethan's posture shifted, not remorse yet, but fear wearing the mask of authority. You shouldn't be out here this late, he said, grasping for ground. It's not safe. Grace almost smiled. Almost. I decide what's safe for me, she replied.
You need to come with me
He
now.
turned away, pacing
really
once,
necessary?
jaw clenched,
I'm afraid
then
it is.
spoke into the radio with forced calm. Dispatch, can you run a name for me? Grace Thompson. The response took only seconds. Seconds that felt like years. Confirmed, the voice crackled back. Judge Thompson, Federal Circuit. Ethan froze. The rain came harder now, drumming against the car roof, against the pavement, against the moment he could never rewind. His shoulders slumped just slightly, the first visible crack. I didn't know, he said. Grace's eyes softened, not in forgiveness, but in recognition. She had heard those words before. Too many times. Spoken only after the damage was done. No, she said gently.
You need to come with me now.
You didn't care to know.
Is this really necessary?
She wrapped the torn
I'm afraid
jacket
it is.
tighter around herself, shivering now, not from the cold but from the delayed tremor of adrenaline. For a brief second, a memory rose uninvited. A younger Grace, 15 years old, standing outside a grocery store
You're
while a
under
security
arrest
guard
for
emptied her
obstruction
backpack
of
onto the
justice.
sidewalk.
Please, you
Her
don't
mother's
understand. I
hand
was
squeezing
only
hers
trying to help.
afterward, whispering, "Stand tall. One day, you'll be the one they answer to." Have you ever had someone stand beside you when no one else would? Maybe a parent, a friend, a stranger who showed up at the right moment. If that's ever happened to you, write "yes" below, and if you remember their name, share it. Gratitude has a way of circling back. Ethan cleared his throat. Look,
You need to come with
I
me
can
now.
explain.
Is this really
She tilted her
necessary?
head.
I'm afraid it
I'm
is.
listening. He hesitated, then spoke faster, as if speed could make it sound better. We've had reports. Break-ins. Suspicious activity. You matched. Matched what? She asked. He stopped.
You're under arrest
The truth
for
hovered
obstruction
between
of
them,
justice.
ugly and
Please, you don't
undeniable.
understand. I was only
Grace
trying
stepped
to
closer
help.
now, just one step. You tore my jacket because you decided who I was before I opened my mouth. Her voice never rose, but each word landed with weight. I grew up believing the law was a shield, she continued. That if I worked hard enough, learned enough, became enough, it would protect me. Tonight reminded me it doesn't. It only protects people willing to protect it. Ethan's
You need to
eyes
come with me
dropped
now.
to the scattered
Is
buttons
this
on the
really
ground.
necessary?
He bent down
afraid it is.
instinctively, picking one up, then another, as if gathering them might somehow repair the moment. His hand shook. I'm sorry, he said, quieter now. I really am. Grace watched him for a long beat. Apologies
You're
were
under
easy.
arrest for
Accountability
obstruction of
was not.
justice. Please,
You'll
you
file
don't
a
understand.
report,
I was only
she
trying
said,
to help.
exactly as this happened. And you'll call a supervisor. Now. He nodded quickly. Yes, of course. As he turned back toward the cruiser, Grace exhaled. A slow release she didn't realize she'd been holding. The night still felt heavy, but something else stirred beneath it. Resolve. Minutes later, another patrol car arrived. Then a supervisor. The sidewalk
You need
filled
to
with
come with me
uniforms, radios
Is this really
murmuring,
necessary?
eyes darting between
afraid it
Grace
is.
and Ethan. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. The mood had shifted, respect replacing suspicion, too late but present. Wrapped now in a borrowed blanket, Grace answered questions with precision.
You're under
Dates,
arrest for obstruction of
words spoken.
justice. Please,
She
you
gave
don't
nothing
understand. I was
extra,
only
nothing
trying to
less.
help.
This wasn't revenge. It was record. Ethan stood off to the side, silent, watching her not as a threat or a target, but as a consequence. When it was finally over, the supervisor approached her. Judge Thompson, we're deeply sorry for what occurred tonight. She nodded once. So am I. As she walked away, the rain began to ease, leaving the streets slick and
need to come
reflective,
with me now.
city lights stretching
Is this
long
really
and distorted
necessary?
beneath her feet.
I'm afraid it is.
Her phone buzzed in her hand, a reminder of tomorrow's docket. One name sat at the top of the list. Officer Ethan Miller. Grace stopped walking. The realization settled slowly, like dawn breaking after a long night. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just remember him. She would judge him. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of Grace's apartment, soft and pale, like it was afraid to wake her too abruptly. She sat at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't touched. The torn jacket lay folded beside her, fabric frayed, buttons missing. Proof that the night before hadn't been a bad dream. Across the room, her phone buzzed again. Emails. Messages. News alerts she refused to open.
Is this really
Grace
necessary?
closed her eyes and breathed in slowly. She had learned how to do that years ago, how to ground herself when the world tried to shake her loose. Inhale. Exhale. Control what you can. But control felt different today. At the courthouse, the building rose like it always had, stone, glass, authority carved into every line. People moved through the doors with purpose, lawyers adjusting ties, clerks balancing files, defendants walking a few steps behind their attorneys. Normal life. Routine justice. Grace walked in quietly, heels echoing down the marble hall. Heads turned. Some nodded respectfully. Others lingered a second too long, curious. Word had already begun to spread, though no one dared say it out loud. Inside her chambers, she set her bag down and stared at the bench, the place where she had spent years weighing truth against excuses. Today, it felt heavier. The clerk knocked gently. "Judge Thompson, your docket is ready." Grace nodded. "Thank you, Ava." Ava hesitated. "Are you okay?" Grace met her eyes and offered a small, honest smile. "I will be." Courtroom B was full when Grace entered. The murmur of voices faded as everyone rose. She took her seat slowly, letting the room settle. Her gaze moved across the rows, plaintiffs, defendants, officers in uniform. And then she saw him. Ethan Miller sat stiffly at the defense table, hands folded so tightly his knuckles were pale. He wore his uniform like armor, but it didn't fit the same today. His eyes lifted for a moment, met hers, and dropped just as fast. The clerk called the case. Grace listened as the charges were read, her face unreadable. This wasn't about last night alone. There were prior complaints, use of force questions, a pattern that, until now, had been brushed aside. As arguments unfolded, Grace felt the pull of memory tug at her. The rain, the ripped fabric, the way his voice had sharpened when he thought no one important was watching. She acknowledged it, then set it aside. This was the line she never crossed. Fairness wasn't forgiveness. And justice wasn't personal, even when it hurt. As the attorney spoke, Grace's mind drifted briefly to her childhood again. Her mother at the kitchen sink, sleeves rolled up, saying, "Do the right thing even when it costs you something." Especially then. Now it's your turn. Pause for just a second. Think about one small good thing you've done for someone recently. Maybe you helped without being asked, or listened when it mattered. Share it in the comments. Let others see that goodness still shows up in quiet ways. Ethan's lawyer finished speaking. The room waited. Grace leaned forward slightly. "Officer Miller," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Do you wish to speak?" Ethan stood slowly. Every movement felt measured, like one wrong step could collapse him. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. He swallowed. "I want to take responsibility, not just for what's on paper, but for what I did." A murmur rippled through the room. "I made assumptions," he continued, voice unsteady. "I acted on bias I didn't want to admit I had. And I hurt someone who didn't deserve it." Grace watched him closely, not as the woman from the sidewalk, but as the judge sworn to see truth. "I can't undo that night," Ethan said, "but I'm willing to face the consequences." Silence followed. Heavy. Expectant. Grace took a breath. "This court does not exist to protect comfort," she said. "It exists to protect people, especially when power is misused." She laid out her ruling carefully. Disciplinary action, mandatory bias training, suspension pending further review. Each word deliberate. Each consequence earned. Ethan nodded as she spoke, eyes shining but steady. When she finished, he exhaled, like someone who had been holding his breath for years. Court adjourned. As people filed out, Grace remained seated for a moment, alone with the echo of her own words. Her chest felt tight, not with anger, but with something close to grief. The kind that comes from knowing justice can be right and still feel heavy. Later, in the quiet hallway, Ethan approached cautiously. He stopped a few feet away. "Judge Thompson," he said. "Grace." She turned to face him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said quickly. "I just wanted to say thank you. For being fair." Grace studied him, really studied him, and saw not a villain, not a symbol, but a flawed human standing at the edge of change. "Fairness is the minimum," she replied softly. "What you do next is the part that matters." He nodded, eyes wet. "I won't waste it." As he walked away, Grace felt something shift inside her, not relief, not closure, but the fragile beginning of peace. Outside, sunlight warmed the courthouse steps. People passed by, unaware of the quiet transformation that had just taken place inside. Grace stepped into the light, holding her head high, carrying both the pain and the hope forward, ready for what came next. The city moved on quickly, as cities always do. Coffee lines curled around corners. Buses hissed at stops. Somewhere, a street musician played an off-key violin that echoed between buildings. But inside Grace, time felt slower, stretched thin by everything she hadn't said, everything she still carried. She walked home that evening instead of taking a car. The air was cool, clean after the rain, and each step felt deliberate. When she reached her apartment, she paused at the door, fingers brushing the worn wood as if grounding herself before stepping back into solitude. Inside, silence greeted her. Grace placed her keys down, slipped off her shoes, and leaned her forehead briefly against the wall. Only then did the weight of the last 48 hours finally settle. The courtroom's strength, the measured voice, the calm authority, all of it drained away, leaving a woman who was tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. She picked up the torn jacket again. This time, she didn't fold it. She sat on the couch and let it rest in her lap, tracing the ripped seam with her thumb. A small, broken sound escaped her, halfway between a breath and a sob. That night, she dreamed of standing in a long hallway with doors on both sides. Every door she opened led to another version of herself. Younger, older, braver, more afraid. Each one wore the same jacket. Each one stood tall. She woke just before dawn. The news broke later that morning. A short article at first. Then another. Then a headline that traveled faster than truth ever did. Federal judge involved in police misconduct case. Comment sections filled instantly, some furious, some dismissive, some quietly supportive. Grace didn't read them. Instead, she went to work. At the courthouse, the atmosphere felt different now, heavier, charged. A few colleagues offered careful words. Others avoided her gaze, unsure which side of history they were standing on. In a small conference room, Grace met with a legal ethics committee. Questions were asked. Boundaries reviewed. Conflicts examined. She answered each one honestly, transparently. Her voice never wavered. Afterward, Ava walked beside her down the hallway. "You know," she said softly, "a lot of people are watching this." Grace nodded. "They always are." "What you did, it mattered," Ava added. "Even if it hurts." Grace stopped walking. "Especially because it hurts." Across town, Ethan sat alone in a quiet apartment that suddenly felt too loud. His uniform hung untouched on a chair. The buttons were polished, the fabric clean, but he couldn't bring himself to wear it. He replayed the night over and over. Not just the moment he grabbed the jacket, but the choices that led there. The assumptions. The silence of colleagues. The ease with which power had slipped into cruelty. For the first time, he didn't look away from it. He attended the first mandated training session that afternoon. A small room. Folding chairs. Faces that mirrored discomfort and resistance. When the facilitator asked why they were there, most gave rehearsed answers. Ethan spoke last. "I'm here because I hurt someone," he said. "And because I don't want to be that man again." The room went quiet. That evening, Grace received an unexpected letter. Handwritten. Simple envelope. No return address. Inside, only a few lines. "Judge Thompson, I don't expect absolution. I just needed you to know, your ruling forced me to see myself clearly for the first time. I'm starting over. Thank you for not looking away. Grace read it twice. Then she placed it in a drawer, not as a trophy, not as closure, but as a reminder of what accountability could begin. If that realization hit you in the chest the way it did her, leave a red heart below. Sometimes a single symbol carries more empathy than paragraphs ever could. Weeks passed. The jacket was repaired by a small tailor down the street. The seams were visible if you looked closely, not hidden, just reinforced. Grace wore it again one morning, standing taller for it. She noticed the way people looked at her now, some with admiration, others with discomfort. She accepted both. Growth was never convenient. One afternoon, as she exited the courthouse, Grace spotted Ethan across the street. He wasn't in uniform. Just jeans, a jacket, a man blending into the crowd. He hesitated when he saw her, then offered a small nod, respectful, distant. Grace returned it. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because sometimes the most powerful change happens quietly, in the spaces where ego gives way to truth and pain becomes purpose. And yet, the hardest questions still waited ahead. The letter stayed in Grace's drawer longer than she expected. Not because she forgot it, but because she remembered it too well. Some nights, she'd open the drawer just enough to see the edge of the envelope, then close it again. Healing, she knew, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about deciding what to carry forward. The question came quietly. One afternoon, after court had adjourned early, Grace was sitting alone in her chambers when Ava knocked. "There's a request," she said carefully. "From Officer Miller's attorney. They're asking if you'd consider a restorative justice meeting." Grace's hands stilled on the file she was closing. Restorative justice wasn't common in cases like this, especially not when power and race were tangled so tightly. It meant sitting face to face. Listening. Speaking without the shield of the bench. "Only if it's voluntary," Grace said. "And only if it's supervised." Ava nodded. He agreed to all of it. The meeting took place in a neutral room weeks later. No robes. No uniforms. Just two chairs across from each other, a mediator between them, and a silence thick with history. Ethan entered first. He looked different, not just out of uniform, but out of posture. Less rigid. More present. When Grace walked in, he stood instinctively, then stopped himself, unsure. They sat. The mediator spoke briefly, then stepped back. Ethan took a breath. "I've practiced this 100 times, he said. "And none of it feels enough." Grace folded her hands. "Then don't practice. Just speak." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I grew up thinking being a good cop meant being in control. That fear was a threat. That authority meant distance." He swallowed. "I never learned to see people. I learned to categorize them." Grace listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't correct him. She let the truth stretch out between them. "What I did to you wasn't a mistake," Ethan continued. "It was a choice. And I own that." The words settled heavy and real. Grace finally spoke. "Do you know what hurt the most?" she asked quietly. He shook his head. "It wasn't the jacket," she said. "It was realizing that even after everything I've earned, I was still invisible to you." Ethan closed his eyes. A tear slipped free. "I see you now," he whispered. "And I'm ashamed it took that much. If that revelation made your chest tighten, you're not alone. Be honest. Could you forgive after something like that? Type forgive if you think you could, or never if the wound would be too deep to cross." The meeting ended without hugs. Without absolution. But it ended with truth, and that mattered. Months later, a community forum invited Grace to speak. The room was full, students, parents, officers, activists. Faces carrying hope and skepticism in equal measure. Grace stepped to the podium, repaired jacket on her shoulders, voice steady. "Justice isn't just what happens in courtrooms," she said. "It's what happens when we choose to see each other fully, especially when it's uncomfortable." In the back of the room, Ethan listened quietly. After the event, a young girl approached Grace, eyes wide. "I want to be a judge one day," she said. Grace knelt to her level. Then you already are, she smiled. You're just growing into it. As the crowd thinned, Grace felt something unfamiliar bloom, not closure, not victory, but warmth. The kind that comes from knowing pain didn't end the story. And as she walked out into the evening air, lights glowing softly around her, one truth echoed clearly in her heart. This wasn't about punishment. It was about becoming better than the moment that broke you. Winter arrived softly that year, without drama. Snow dusted the sidewalks like a second chance, covering cracks and stains with something clean. Grace watched it fall from her office window one late afternoon, the courthouse nearly empty, the world hushed in that way only cold weather could bring. Change had been happening quietly. New policies were being reviewed. Body cameras discussed with seriousness instead of resistance. Training sessions no longer treated as punishment, but as responsibility. None of it made headlines. None of it went viral. But it was real. Grace felt it in small moments. A clerk speaking up without fear, a young attorney asking better questions, a community meeting where anger slowly softened into dialogue. Progress didn't arrive like a parade. It came like snow. One flake at a time. Ethan's suspension ended with conditions. He didn't return to patrol right away. Instead, he volunteered, not for praise, not for optics, but because the quiet work left no room to hide. He spoke to new recruits. Sat in uncomfortable circles. Listened more than he talked. Some days, the weight of his past pressed hard against his chest. Other days, he felt lighter, not because he was forgiven, but because he was honest. One evening, he found himself standing outside the same street where everything had begun. The pavement was dry now. No rain. No sirens. Just traffic humming and a streetlight flickering softly. He stayed there only a minute. Across the city, Grace attended a small award ceremony she hadn't asked for. The applause felt distant, almost undeserved. She accepted the plaque politely, then set it on a shelf she rarely looked at. What mattered more was the email she received later that night. From a public defender she barely knew. Your ruling changed how my client saw the system. He said, for the first time it felt fair. I thought you should know. Grace closed her laptop and leaned back, eyes glistening. Not because the pain was gone, but because the purpose was clearer. Weeks later, Grace and Ethan crossed paths again by chance. Not in a courtroom, not in a meeting, but at a community food drive. No agenda. No microphones. Just boxes of canned goods and volunteers moving in quiet rhythm. They exchanged a nod. Then, after a moment's hesitation, Grace spoke. Are you doing okay? She asked. Ethan nodded. I'm still trying to do better. She considered him for a beat, then handed him a box. That's all anyone can do. They worked side by side for an hour. No heavy conversation. No revisiting the past. Just shared effort. Shared humanity. As they finished, a woman nearby whispered to Grace, "It gives me hope, seeing this." Grace smiled softly. If you believe that hope still has a place in this world, even when things feel broken, comment below. Let's leave something warm here for the next person who stumbles into this story needing light. Later that night, Grace walked home under glowing streetlights, breath visible in the cold air. She thought about the girl who wanted to be a judge. About the officers learning to unlearn. About the jacket she wore, stitched, scarred, stronger. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a single moment. It was a practice. A choice made again and again, sometimes without applause, sometimes without certainty. And though the past would always exist, sharp and unchangeable, it no longer defined the ending. Because redemption didn't arrive with perfection. It arrived with effort. And effort was finally everywhere. Spring didn't announce itself loudly. It slipped in through cracked windows and open jackets, through longer evenings and the smell of rain that no longer felt threatening. The city softened with it. Grace noticed the change most in the courtroom. People spoke differently now. Not perfectly, but more carefully. Officers hesitated before interrupting. Attorneys listened instead of posturing. Even the silence felt more intentional, less dismissive. One afternoon, a young public defender stood before her bench, hands shaking slightly. "Your Honor," he said, This is my first case. Grace smiled gently. Then let's make sure you remember why you chose this work. She guided him through the hearing with patience, correcting without condescension, firmness without cruelty. When it ended, the young man exhaled like he'd been underwater. Thank you, he said quietly. Grace nodded. You earned it. Outside the courthouse, protesters still gathered some days. Signs rose. Voices clashed. Pain hadn't vanished. It had simply found new language. Grace never rushed past them. She walked through slowly, eyes open, absorbing the weight of it. At night, she returned home to an apartment that felt warmer now. She cooked more. Slept better. The jacket hung by the door, worn often. It seems a quiet statement. Broken things could still serve purpose. Ethan's days looked different too. He was back on duty, not on the streets yet, but in community liaison work. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with adrenaline or applause. It came with folding chairs in school gyms, long conversations in church basements, and the humility of being asked hard questions by people who didn't owe him trust. Some meetings were brutal. You don't get to apologize and move on, one man said sharply. Ethan nodded. I know. I'm not asking you to. Other meetings surprised him. An elderly woman squeezed his hand after he listened without interrupting. Just keep listening, she said. He did. Months passed. The city kept breathing. Slowly, unevenly, but forward. One evening, Grace attended a small recital at a local school. The girl who'd told her she wanted to be a judge sat in the front row, feet swinging, eyes bright. Afterward, she ran up and hugged Grace tightly. I told my teacher about you, she said proudly. Grace laughed softly. I hope you told her you're braver than I am. The girl beamed. I will be. Later that night, Grace sat by her window, city lights twinkling below. She thought about the night in the rain, how close she'd come to letting bitterness settle permanently in her chest. She could have chosen anger. She would have been justified. Instead, she chose something harder. Not forgetting. Not excusing. But transforming. Across town, Ethan finished a late shift and sat alone in his car for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. He thought about the man he'd been, how sure he'd been of himself, how wrong. He wasn't healed. He wasn't redeemed. But he was awake. And sometimes, that was the beginning of everything. The city lights reflected off the windshield like scattered stars, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan didn't feel the need to look away. Both of them, Grace and Ethan, carried scars now. Different shapes. Different weights. But neither walked alone anymore. And the story, though quieter now, wasn't finished yet. Because one last truth still waited to be spoken, not in anger, not in judgment, but in meaning. The city woke slowly that morning, bathed in a soft gold light that made even the oldest buildings look gentle. Grace stood at her bedroom window, coffee warming her hands, watching people begin their days, rushing, laughing, struggling, living. From up here, it all looked fragile. Precious. She thought again about that night in the rain. How easily everything could have hardened her. How tempting it would have been to let bitterness become armor. To let anger write the rest of the story for her. No one would have blamed her. Pain had earned her that right. But pain, she had learned, was loud. Purpose was quieter. At the courthouse later that day, Grace presided over a simple case. Nothing headline-worthy. A misunderstanding. Raised voices. Hurt pride. As she listened, she noticed something small but powerful. Both sides were trying. Really trying. Not to win, but to be heard. When she delivered her ruling, she spoke plainly. Justice isn't about humiliation, she said. It's about repair. The room felt warmer for it. After court, Grace walked out alone. No escort. No rush. On the steps, she paused, letting the sun rest on her face. The jacket hugged her shoulders, still marked, still imperfect. Still hers. Across the street, a group of teenagers laughed loudly, unaware of how close the world always was to shaping them. Grace smiled faintly, hoping the future would be kinder to them than the past had been to her. Not perfect. Just kinder. Ethan stood at a nearby crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. He didn't notice Grace at first. When he did, he hesitated, then raised a hand, not as an officer, not as an apology, but as a human acknowledgement. She nodded back. That was enough. They didn't need words. Words had already done their work. Later that evening, Grace returned home and opened the drawer one last time. She took out Ethan's letter, reread it slowly, then placed it back, not because she needed it anymore, but because it had served its purpose. She closed the drawer gently. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't a gift you gave someone else. It was a weight you decided to stop carrying. And if this story moved something inside you, don't just scroll away quietly. Tap like, not for me, but for the soul who carried humiliation, fear, and pain, and still chose dignity. One simple click can be your way of saying, I saw you. I felt it. You mattered. That night, Grace wrote in a small notebook she rarely showed anyone. Just one sentence. I did not become smaller to survive. I became stronger to protect others. She closed the notebook and turned off the light. Somewhere in the city, a young girl dreamed of standing behind a bench one day. Somewhere else, a man learned to question himself before judging someone else. Somewhere, a system shifted, not enough, not fully, but forward. And that was the truth no headline could capture. Change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, through restraint, through courage, through the quiet decision to do what's right when no one is forcing you to. Grace lay in the dark, breathing evenly, at peace with the story she didn't choose, but chose how to finish. Because the moral was never about power. It was about humanity. And humanity, when protected by conscience, still had a chance.